Hey everyone, welcome back to RetroBreak and welcome to episode 2 of Experience Boost. In today's episode I've got 10 really interesting retro games and fun facts to show you, so let's get started with the first game I've got here, which is a 4-in-1 cart made by a company called Satchen for the original Game Boy, and there's two very interesting things about this cartridge. So it contains 4 games, and honestly I have to say that none of the games are actually any fun to play at all. There's a weird Pac-Man style racing game, there's a kind of Clax style puzzle game, and then there's 2 other ones. There's a single screen platformer, and the last one is basically Othello, but there's actually 2 interesting things about this release. So here's how the games look, and as you can see they run perfectly fine on the analog pocket right here. If we boot into the game, you can see on the main menu it gives you the list of the 4 games that you can play right there. But if you play this in an original Game Boy Color, some variations of it, or if you play it on here, which is a modded Game Boy Color, which still uses a basic Game Boy Color circuit board, it just doesn't do anything, it just hangs on the Nintendo logo. And the reason for that is that the developers actually did something inside the cartridge to bypass that Nintendo lockout screen, but it only works on certain revisions of the Game Boy Color, but thankfully it actually runs fine on the analog pocket. But the other interesting fact is that the games on this collection aren't actually Game Boy games at all. They actually came from a different system called the Mega Duck, also known weirdly as the Cougar Boy as well. It was a Hong Kong-based handheld gaming console that came out in 1993, and Satchen made a lot of games for that system, but obviously I guess they wanted to make more money. I assume the Mega Duck wasn't a very successful handheld, so they ported a lot of the games onto the Game Boy and then sold them through Hong Kong and China and in different black markets like that. So there's a bunch of different cartridges with all of the Satchen Mega Duck games on, and I would love to try and get more in the future, but I just thought this was so interesting I had to share it as the first game in this video, but there's some more great stuff to come. The second game here is a game for the Game Boy Advance that only came out in Japan called Dial Hex, and this one's also interesting for a few reasons. So first of all, you've probably noticed that the box isn't like a regular Game Boy Advance box. And I've got another one right here. These were actually part of a release called Bit Generations. They actually came out in 2006 in Japan, which was actually 2 years after the DS was released. And these are basically like small-scale artistic games. And this one in particular is interesting for a few reasons. I'm just interrupting the video for a second here because this is really annoying me. Every single time I try and record something from the analog pocket, the controller says that it's disconnected, but it still shows as being connected, and I have to reach around the back of there and press the button to ask it to reconnect again, like that, and then hold this down, and then I'll get maybe 5 minutes of gameplay. Well, I was going to say that I press the button there and reconnect it, but now it's completely dead altogether. Like if I unplug this, I was trying to charge it because it didn't have much power left. It's still saying that it's charging, and it just won't do anything. Pressing the button on there won't do anything. Can't control the game anymore. So that's all you're getting for Dial Hex. I can't record anything because it's just looking for the controller. The controller's here. According to the controller, it's still charging. So there you go. Enjoy. If anyone knows what the problem is it the controller that's the problem? Is it the analog pocket? I've updated the firmware. It's on the latest firmware. I don't know what else to attempt, but it's really frustrating. This one was actually designed by the same company that made Chibi Robo for the GameCube, and another great Japanese exclusive GameCube game called Gift Pier, so it's really interesting to see what they could do on a small scale. The game kind of most similarly resembles something like Bejeweled Twist, but instead of twisting the 4 blocks around, you're actually turning an entire hexagon, and there's actually some physics involved as well, so if you turn into a blank space, the triangles can actually fall into place. It's a very simple concept, but it works quite well, and I just love the concept of this series in general. And Dial Hex here actually got re-released on the Wii Virtual Console. And some of these games did actually get re-released, and also English versions, a few years later on WiiWare. Not all of them, but this one was part of the collection, and it came out on WiiWare over here as RotoHex instead. So there was actually a way to play this one in English, but not some of them, and I would love to try and get the entire series, and when I do, I'll definitely come back here and make a full video on all of the Bit Generations games. Next is Gunpei for the Bandai WonderSwan, and a lot of people probably know this game as a game that was made as a tribute tribute to Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of the WonderSwan, and more importantly, the creator of the original Game Boy. But there's an interesting fact about this game that not a lot of people know, and I have done a full video about this in the past, so if you are interested in what you're hearing here, definitely go and check out the full video. But basically, before Gunpei Yokoi designed the WonderSwan, which unfortunately he didn't live to see the release of, he did actually create some more LCD games, just like his old Game & Watch games that he'd made in the past, and one of those was this game that I've got right here by Koto Labs, which is the company that he founded, and this game is called Professor Heno Heno. But the most interesting thing about this, and the connection to Gunpei, is the fact that it's actually exactly the same game. So not only is Gunpei on the WonderSwan a tribute to Gunpei Yokoi, he actually made it. He made it in this form right here. And as you can see there on the box, and as you can see on the screenshot on the back, compared to the screenshots on the back here, it is identical. It's just the fact that this one uses LCDs and this one uses actual pixels. And if you would like to see a lot more information about this, definitely check out my history video about Gunpei Yokoi and about the WonderSwan in general. I've done two, and I really enjoyed researching for them, and they haven't got enough views, so I will link them at the end of this video, and definitely go and give them a watch. But yeah, Gunpei, fantastic game, and it was actually a series that spanned across many different platforms into the future too. Next is a game for the Famicom that came out in 2018. It's called Battle Kid and the Fortress of Peril, and there's a lot of interesting backstory with this one. So although this version came out in 2018, the original version of the game dates all the way back to 2010, and that original NES version became popular a few years later when the channel Game Grumps did a Let's Play, and because of the infuriating nature of this game, that Let's Play went viral, and it has some amazing clips. And then 4 years after that, Columbus Circle, the Japanese publisher here, actually picked the game up, but actually changed a lot as well as translating it into Japanese. So this is kind of an improved release of the original, and it's a great fun game too, but extremely challenging. And talking of Columbus Circle, they're actually a publisher of homebrew releases in Japan, including a really interesting one, which is the next game on my list here. This is Shockman Zero, or Shubibinman Zero. So the really interesting thing about this game, Shockman Zero, is the fact that it originally came out in 1997 for the Satellaview, which was kind of like an online game transmission service for the Super Famicom. So the game was lost for a long time until Columbus Circle decided to put it back on cartridge and to re-release it. And this version that I'm holding here came out in 2017, and you can actually buy this in stores in Japan. I actually got this in 2020 from Yodobashi Camera, the biggest technology chain in Japan, and they just had this on the shelf next to the Switch games as a brand new physical release, and just how cool is that? And not only that, the Shockman series in general is a really great series. It's got a lot of games on the PC Engine, and it's got this one on the Super Famicom, and they're really fun platformers, kind of in the Mega Man style, but with more like melee combat, and this SNES one's especially fun. I actually really enjoy this game. And last year, it actually got a proper digital release on all modern consoles worldwide, which is really cool as well. So now, you don't have to get a Super Famicom, you don't have to try and figure out how to get the ROM off the download service. You can actually just go on the Switch eShop and buy it right now, and I would definitely recommend doing so because it is a lot of fun. Next is another game by my favourite game developers, Quintet. This game is Soul Blazer, and this one's kind of like a dungeon crawler, but it's got a really strange overworld and a really interesting and very, very unique story and set of characters. I actually played all the way through it on stream for the first time ever last year, and I had a great time doing so, and I'm definitely planning on doing a full video about my thoughts about this game in the future, so look forward to that. It's a very simple game at its core, and it has very basic mechanics, but the way the world kind of expands as you're going, and basically you do something in the dungeon and it affects something back in the town, and then you can speak to more NPCs and try and unravel the mystery of that area before you move on to somewhere completely different and then do the same thing again over and over again. It's such a unique structure for a game, and it works incredibly well. The graphics are quite basic, but the music is fantastic. I love the soundtrack to this game. And it also kind of fits into the same series as Illusion of Time and Terranigma as well, and ActRaiser, which is kind of like my favourite game series ever, and this is one of my favourite entries as well. Really great game. Definitely check it out if you like SNES RPGs and you want something a little bit more action focused, but also something really strange and surprisingly funny as well. There was actually some moments in this game where I just laughed out loud. It was just so bizarre. Next up are two of my favourite games for the PC that I enjoyed so much as a kid. They are Speedy Egbert 1 and 2, and I'm including both of these in the same spot in the video because they're basically the same game, just the second one has some slight enhancements. But the reason I love these games so much is their really easy to use level creation feature. And looking at it today, it's probably awful, and it's definitely not anything that you would actually use professionally or even use just for fun, because it probably sucks. But back in the day, I knew no better, and I had an amazing time with these games. And in some ways, it did actually help me when I was making my own games a bit later on in life. Just understanding basic things like filling in the blocks above where the ceiling is just to make it look like you're actually in somewhere rather than just things floating around, and having little pillars hanging off different things to make them look like they fit into the world and stuff like that. It's so simple. The gameplay itself was really simple as well, but there's a load of little items that you can put in the game. I remember there was like a jetpack that you can get to sort of let him fly around, and there's a skateboard and all sorts of weird things like that. And it did have a single player mode as well, which I never really touched. I was always just mostly interested in the level creation. But the interesting fact that I've got about these is when I was doing a bit of research for this video to find out more about Speedy Egbert and whether anyone else even knew about it, well, it turns out that the developer has actually been making these games for like close to 40 years, all the way back since the start of the 80s, and there's actually 27 different games in the Speedy Egbert series, and his official name is actually Bloopy or Bloppy. So there he is, that little yellow egg mascot character is still going strong today, and last year they actually released a brand new version of Speedy Egbert with a new level creation mode and everything. So I was just so shocked to not only find out that other people knew this game existed, but to know that the developer has been working on it for so long and it's part of a massive franchise was kind of mind-blowing to me, because I just love these games, and I really do wonder whether they hold up today. I haven't been able to get them to run, but maybe I'll try for this video. If you saw gameplay, then I managed to get it to work. Next up is Sparkster, the sequel to my favourite game on the Mega Drive, Rocket Knight Adventures, and this one is quite different, but I do still really enjoy it. It has some very different gameplay mechanics. For one thing, in this game, you can actually continually use your rocket booster, unlike the first one where it has to keep charging up, which makes it really fun to fly around the stages, and the stages are a lot bigger and more open in this one as well, which makes for some really fun gameplay. In my opinion though, there's too many slow auto-scrolling sections which slow the experience down just a bit too much, and some of the boss fights can be annoying, and the controls don't feel quite as smooth as the first game. But I still really enjoy it, and I actually enjoyed playing it all the way through again on stream recently, because it finally got re-released on the Switch, and I had a great time doing so. And fun fact about Sparkster, there's also another game on the Super Nintendo called Sparkster, which a lot of people, I assume, just think that it's the same as this, but they're actually two completely different games. A lot of people say the Super Nintendo game is actually better, but I actually think the Mega Drive one is the better of the two Sparkster games. But all three of the games in the Rocket Knight series are amazing. But we don't talk about the Xbox game. That one just does not exist in my opinion. Just forget I even mentioned it. Okay, moving on. And we're going to finish this episode of Experience Boost with two games for the Super Famicom. Let's start off with Mario and Wario, which is definitely the most interesting game in the whole Mario series in my opinion. This one is so weird and obscure. Basically, it's a platforming puzzle game, kind of similar to some of the later Mario vs. Donkey Kong games, but it uses the SNES mouse as its only form of movement. And you don't control Mario, or Wario for that matter, you actually control this little fairy right here, and you go around with a magic wand doing things to the environment to try and help Mario get to the end of the stage. But the dastardly Wario has put a bucket on Mario's head! Can you believe it? Out of all the crazy schemes he could come up with, putting a bucket on his head was the most inventive apparently. So Mario's got a bucket on his head, he can't see where he's going, and he relies on this fairy to get him around these weird, kind of textureless levels. It's a very, very strange concept, but it's a very fun game and I do really enjoy it. I don't know where my SNES mouse is, so unfortunately I can't play it properly, but it does work just as well on emulators. And the fun fact for this game, it was actually made by Game Freak, the same people who made Pokemon. So it's just a really weird game from that point of view as well. They made this before they made Pokemon, obviously. But the really cool thing is that they actually referenced it in Pokemon Red and Blue. If you go up to the TV in your house right at the start of the game, you can actually see that it says on the screen that they're playing a game in which Mario wears a bucket on his head, and they are actually referring to this game right here, which is a really cool nod to one of their earlier creations, and it is a really fun game too. And the final game for this episode is another puzzle platformer for the Super Famicom. This one is called Super Gusun Oyoyo, and this is actually part of the Gusun series. And the reason I love this series so much is that it's very reminiscent of my favourite game in the Tetris series, which is Tetris Plus. Well, I guess second favourite, because I said Tetris Effect was my favourite in my previous video, which was my top 25 games of all time. So this is reminiscent of my second favourite Tetris game of all time, and I really love those kind of games where you have a character walking around in the stage, but you're not actually controlling the character, you're controlling something else in the level. In this case, you're controlling Tetris-style blocks that fall down from the top of the screen, and you just have to try and get the character to the end of the stage and you move on to the next level. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds though. This game can get infuriating. And there's actually a few other games in the series as well. There's one on the PlayStation, there's another one on the Super Famicom, which unfortunately is insanely expensive, so I haven't managed to get myself a physical copy of that. And it also came out in the arcade as well. If you enjoyed this and you want to see more interesting games, I'm actually doing posts over on my Blue Sky account, so please give me a follow over on Blue Sky if you want to see more of these Experience Boost posts before the video, and if you want to watch the last episode, click on the video up here, and if you want to watch that Gunpei Yokoi History video that I mentioned earlier, then click on this side of the screen. And that's it for now. I will see you all again very soon. Goodbye.